Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Collective Disability Justice Focused Tech, a conversation between Loren Britton, Robel Afeworki Abay, and Pernilla Philip that asks, what gets to be called technology and what counts as technical creativity? What kind of techno-vernacular creativity does not get to be called technology because anti-racist disability justice-focused communities perform it? And what kind of technological worldings can be enacted by communities for communities? This conversation looks to share the ways in which disability refigures the terms of technology based on how her historically, disabled people have hacked and prototyped technologies on the spot and over time to make situations work for them. Together, they will critique the way ableist white supremacy devalues these technologies and how techno-ableism furthers ideas perpetuating technology as though disabled, queer, racialized, and neurodivergent people don't know what they need. This conversation holds space for collective disability-focused tech practices to shape differently who has agency in tech development. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to, first, Pernilla Philip, who explores questions around chronic illness, in relation to the medical industry. Her work, rooted in lived experience, serves as a testbed for exploring vulnerabilities and strengths of the collective powers of do-it-yourself, DIY, and open source approaches to medical management. Next is Dr. Robel Afeworki Abay, a Black queer disability justice activist, sociologist, and guest professor of disability studies at the Alice Solomon University of Applied Sciences, Berlin. Robel holds a PhD from Humboldt University on decolonizing knowledge on ableism and racism. Robel's research and teaching interests include intersectional disability justice, cryptechnoscience, racism and ableism, gender and queer studies, diversity and intersectionality, techno-ableism, migration and mobility, post-colonial and decolonial theories, climate and social justice, and participatory and inclusive research. Okay. Robel is also a member of the Global Research Innovation Advisory Group, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Health, Equity, and Community Wellbeing, the Toronto Metropolitan University, Center for Inclusive Research Berlin, Humboldt, and the Humboldt University of Berlin, as well as the founder and executive director of Intersectional Disability Justice. And last but certainly not least, I introduce you to, this is very good, it's very well timed, it's like letting everyone come in slowly and find their seat. And last but certainly not least, I introduce you to Loren Britton, who we began a conversation with in the fall, and who joins us this year as a programmer, a workshop convener, and today, conversationalist. Ren is a transdisciplinary artist-designer who holds values that reverberate with transfeminism, technosciences, radical pedagogy, and disability justice. Their programmatic strand for Transmediale uses the form of the workshop to prototype and index technologies that already exist but might not yet be called technologies. And today's unmediated conversation follows that, and it is where transgender politics and critical technical praxis flow into each other. A note for those of you here in the auditorium, access copies are available throughout. They were printed at the door, but if you did not get a copy, you can also scan a QR code that will be displayed shortly, and there's also some printed throughout the auditorium. As you can also see, sign language is available for the entirety of the conversation. Those of you streaming online can find a link to your access copy on the event page if you follow transmediale.de. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you three. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. So an access copy is a copy that is a kind of pre-scripted document that holds all pre-scripted parts of our lecture and input for today. So if it makes this lecture more accessible to you, please feel free to join the link or scan the QR code, and I will read from it. So, and also one other thing to mention that I wanted at the end, we will have Q&A, so you're welcome to kind of hold your questions with you, and we can discuss together at the end. So, in the 504 sit-in, the activist organizations Mission Rebels, Black Panthers, American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities, and the Center for Independent Living activists came together to perform a sit-in to get the 504 regulation signed. This regulation paved the way for the landmark passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act from 1990. The 504 regulation prohibited discrimination against disabled people in programs receiving federal funding, including libraries, transportations, schools, and digital or analog bureaucracy. This act becomes relevant here in Europe as that there is not yet a similar act offering the same kinds of protections, something that German disability justice activists like Raoul Krauthausen has remarked he wishes Germany would adopt. So during this sit-in, disabled activists inside the occupied building in San Francisco prototyped a fridge on the spot using an air conditioning unit and a cardboard box to keep medicine cool for protesters. This is a story I tell in my recent film called Coalition Bouquet 504 Sit-in, and stills from the film are on the screen. It rehearses this story through the metaphor of bouquets. Working with bouquets, I'm affirming that not everything needs to last forever to be meaningful. In this work, and in our panel today, we're critically investigating what gets to be called technology, what counts as technological creativity. Together, we are wondering what kind of techno-vernacular creativity, like this cardboard box turned into a fridge, can be signified as a technology cracking open space for communities focused on intersectional, anti-racist, pro-queer, and disability justice authorship and inventions into techno-worlds. This shifts the terms of who is an expert in technological imagination, worlding, and development. So in my work as an artist and researcher, Tooling Up Against Fascism is about intersectional anti-ableism and disability justice. My work is currently investigating the ways that peoples and communities can, in everyday ways, attend to producing relations and the world otherwise. I follow Polish feminist scholar Ewa Majewska, British-Australian feminist Killjoy scholar Sarah Ahmed, and BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, Disability Justice Collective, Sins Invalid, who articulate in various modes about the everyday. Each of these scholars and contexts affirm rehearsal and refusal as part of ongoing resistances against the violent common. This is a formulation that acknowledges what is common in this moment is rising fascism, loss of rights, and ongoing dispossession for many. However, the commons can also be in otherwise. Our everyday resistances cast the common that we can all be part of, our common, where we have the possibility of flourishing in and with disability justice techno-worlds. A disability justice techno-world that celebrates and makes space for disabled and non-normative bodies and minds. So in anti-ableist and pro-queer worlding, we do things differently. We center care for all of us. We work across languages. We are slower or faster depending on needs. We move with our community rather than individually. We resist and subvert racist institutional powers, and we accept that we are not perfect and we are not trying to be. We're not relating ourselves to a non-disabled neurotypical norm, and we are allowing our body-minds to just be. And we do that increasingly, getting so in tune with ourselves that we can rehearse a different way of being together in relation to all of the overlapping violences all around us. So on Wednesday this week, as Elise mentioned, I led the workshop Indexing and Prototyping Transcript Tech. In this workshop, we spoke about who has agency in worlding technology, and we shared about the reality that the technoscientific canon is filled with artifacts made by and for non-disabled community that our innovations start with. In the video work that I made with Iz Payer called Unforgetting is Caring, Braille and Speak, FTM International number 45, Zenith Hearing Aid, we researched Braille and Speak. This handheld computer, designed in 1987, registered Braille inputs that are registered to take notes and then are read back to its users. This is what we would call a small handheld computer. In the technoscientific canon, however, the milestone of the so-called first handheld computer is registered with IBM's Simon Personal Communicator in 1994, some 7 years later. The Braille and Speak, because it was a technology made by and for disabled community, has been erased from technoscientific history. This structuring of linear time and inscribing of corporate big tech timelines as singular and definitive, following white cishumanist heteronormative frameworks, is what we troubled in our workshop. Together, we shifted the frame of reference to consider what technologies and hacks have made possibility and connection in our transcript community. Disabled and trans, her, his, her stories are rife with loss due to epistemicide, the willful suppressing of ways of knowing. When we make things, often the life conditions we are within do not allow us to hold on to them, to document them, to get them into archives, to carry them with us, and to shift who feels like they have agency over technological development. What if, instead of feeling like we're all powerless in the face of big tech and the extraction that it perpetuates, that all of us understood ourselves as agents of technological innovation or invention? This workshop moved towards recentering our agency by valuing our practices of crypto-technoscientific hacking and trans-community invention as agential moves within technoscience. So in the workshop, we worked on prototyping technologies that we wish we could have and indexing the technologies on GitHub in a repository called Indexing Transcript Tech. Some of the technologies that we included in the index are Braille and Speak, which shifts the timeline in favor of blind community who have been using handheld computers for a long time. We included breastplates from Transvestia and top surgery calendar organizing pads that shift assumptions of cis heteronormativity by adding or removing breasts as needed, and by hacking and strategically using medical infrastructures to get our needs met. And the cardboard box fridge from the 504 sit-in that shifts agency into the hands of those who, in a collective protest action, have prototyped on the spot with materials at hand, making a vernacular, community, and site-specific technology to keep medicine cool and to keep us together. These are all vernacular technological practices: learning by doing, responding to necessity, building from skills we already have and can learn together, and centering our experiences as ones that we can hack and move from. This series of shifts speaks to the kind of shifts I'm making in my artistic research work and my recent installation, Mining Misspelling. Relating to community-specific and linguistic technological practices, Mining Misspelling engages with the fact that I'm dyslexic and moves away from dyslexia as a pathologized difference towards dyslexia as a magical way of handling words and expressing things. Thank you. That's right. So in the installation, the red squiggly line that appears under misspelled words is freed from algorithmically noting correction and instead is free to dance in the installation as a line celebrating neurodivergent ways of being in the world. When recentering neurodiversity as a powerful way of being in the world, misspelling becomes magic. Suddenly, dyslexia can be seen as a rearrangement of words away from the normative or correct way of speaking English. Dyslexia refuses normative spelling and the ways that spelling standardization has followed the development of computing through the production of a one world, where there is only one correct way to spell something, one category each data point has to be slotted into. This production of the one way, one world that dyslexia refuses reminds that neurodivergent and disabled experience is always aligned with anti-colonial ways of moving through the world. My experience of correction in this way is structured by the ways that there must be a one way, one world, the correct way, a colonial norm. Dyslexia exposes the power structures that produce the need for correction. Are we corrected for our difference, or are we celebrated and just allowed to be? Many perspectives of one correct world are exemplified in proclamations such as the end of spelling errors, as suggested for an article in the New Criterion from last year. It proclaims that all speaking problems in the English language are now fixed because of spell check. Spellcheck, an algorithmically powered application, removes vernacular, situated cultural, and specific modes and methods of articulation. So in this installation, playing with the aesthetics of access, I thought of my work as an exploded access copy, like the one that you might be reading to follow my lecture, where the language dances across the pages and aligns some of the times and escapes into non-alignment at other times. This spatialization of language I thought of as being akin to dyslexia, where the words float around and get caught correctly or incorrectly on the page. Normative ways of spelking, spieling, splaying, of articulating become questioned as another mode of colonial control that AI technologies further. In the installation, I recount the history of the Levenshtein-Demeroux algorithm, a string algorithm that operates much like large language models do in ChatGPT and Midjourney. And in this work, I suggest that this algorithm would be better put to use if it was looking for magic in language rather than paradigms of correction that condition its use. I go back. Audre Lorde famously proclaimed that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Mining misspelling suggests investigating the ways in which we might choose to speak the language of the machine less and less well, so that we can find ways of speaking with machines rather than as machines. To do that, I practiced with spellcheck as a common technology that most engage yet rarely investigate, to consider the technical normativities it reinscribes through its use. To sum up what refuses simple quantification, in these moments I shared with you my research of coalition storytelling with the work Coalition Bouquet 504 sit-in, telling stories on the spot around collective vernacular technological inventions. I shared with the troubles and possibilities of naming, prototyping, and holding space for transcript indexing and invention with the workshop Indexing and Prototyping Transcript Tech from this week. And I shared about this last work, Mining Misspelling, which engages with the poetics of speaking with machines less and less well, away from paradigms of standardization that closely follow paradigms of pathologization and continue colonial and ableist continuums. Collective disability justice tech in my practice emerges as a praxis of recentering who has agency, equipping ourselves with the herstories of our collective successes, and engaging on-the-spot technical invention as a rehearsal of our world as possible. And with that, I'll pass it to my dear colleague, Pernilla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ren, so much for sharing your amazing work with us. And thank you also for having me here today. I'm so glad and excited that so many things that you said hopefully also mirror into the things that I've been want to talk about today. First of all, my name is Pernilla Manjola Philip, and I'll do a quick image description. My hair has gotten pretty long, and it's brown, similar to my skin. I'm wearing a shirt with horses and a very old vest that comes from South Africa, where my family has lived for several generations. Like me, my vest holds stories from South Asia. My pronouns are she and her. So there are many ways of chronic illness, and each person lives in their own way. In my art practice, I take a starting point from my own lived experience as a person with type 1 diabetes, and I focused in on the collective aspects of finding solutions together. Approaches to chronic illness may depend on how and where you live, medical insurance, relation to your medical team, language barriers, the color of your skin, economic or environmental factors, to name a few. It's essentially a mix of choices and privileges. But however you manage diabetes, I think everybody who lives with this illness can agree that it's a very data-focused illness. An array of devices are available that both gather and process biometric data. Because you can see on the image of the screen, these are the two devices that store my images, that collect and store my images. My data, sorry. Many of us who started questioning the use of our data soon discovered that our devices are locked. They are locked and they run under the military term black box technology. A so-called black box, although, as you saw in the previous picture, they actually come in white, in my case, are units that are designed to make it possible to perform a function without knowing what's happening inside. These cages render some functions unavailable and demand ongoing approvals for users in order to function. You probably ask why these boxes are locked up in the first place. The general consensus is that it is a solution that's aimed at safety. I will get back to that and what safety means for me, and the importance of also addressing who is being kept safe, as well as recognizing the many ways that safety is also a feeling. Together, hackers and coders volunteer their time and attention to write code that open up these boxes and publish this code on GitHub. This open source project helped me to open up my insulin pump. With this code, I am able to adjust my settings, alarms, and the communication between the devices in ways that is not possible with the official system. Running this open source code on my phone was a relief, as it automated some functions that previously was not possible. Even though DIY medical tech sounds like something that you do alone, and in some ways it also is. After downloading, I do take full responsibility for building and running this system at my own risk. However, many of us experience it as much more than that. The code, the updates, the tutorials, the forums, the many ways of feedbacking are all places for support. Connecting to others who are also navigating ways to be with their illness, in search for ways to live with agency, and looking for ways that we can do that together. Code that someone else wrote that helps many of us to live a slightly smoother life. This installation that I entitled the Care Unit, that you see on the screen, is an attempt to unite and to invite to what it can feel like when leaning into technology. Being with technology, whether it be the code that's informing my blood glucose levels, the blankets that is keeping me warm, or even as basic as the bed to sleep in. I wanted to show that intimate feeling, that lost and hard to reach search for safety, and some of the ways that many depend on technology. At the same time, I wonder who feels welcome into the world of DIY medical management. Let's ask ourselves who actually has the time to do this kind of work. As a result of structural inequalities, open source hacking communities are often very white and violently aligned with patriarchal and masculinist attitudes. There seems to be a kind of coder confidence that some people take to easier than others. Of course, there are many ways to be an expert and many brilliant approaches to engaging with DIY medical tools. Ones that are both playful and useful, places that allow us all to be experts together. About 5 years ago, when I started integrating open source system into my medical therapy, it seemed to me as if I was leaving a kind of safe place to go into a wildly unstable alternative. I encountered a belief, both within myself and my surroundings, that technology that is approved for therapy by government organizations are well tested and are therefore safe. But when I look at my needs and the needs of many other chronically ill and disabled people, I struggle to see such a dichotomy. our needs are not always met, and if they are, tomorrow might be different. On the screen you see a detail of my installation, where I refer to my experienced split between medicine's sterile language and the messy reality for so many of us. A refusal to a smooth display and a welcoming of a bubbly language and recognition of frustration. I wonder, what is safety and for who? The idea that proprietary systems are smooth and free of friction and irritations are simply not the reality for many of us. Safety cannot be standardized. Open source projects are often framed as open source solutions. But let's also recognize that vulnerabilities and labor involved in creating them. The work of hackers and early users have paved the way for others, often out of necessity rather than choice. Safety is not just a matter of compliance and approval. It's also a feeling. For me, safety isn't found in staying within the rigid proprietary systems, nor in the illusion of frictionless care. Instead, it comes from staying connected to others. Maybe that's what makes me feel safe, at least, or at least a little bit safer. Thank you.
Thanks, Pernilla, and also Ren for the speech. I think it's very interesting also to go further on the discussion or go a step back, depending how you will understand my speech. I am not from technology studies. I am a sociologist, so this is going to be very, very theoretical understanding of how I understand how what we understand as technology has always been gendered and racialized. And this is also very important for me as a researcher in critical race theory to understand how colonialism and capitalist ideologies have always been producing technology as with the cost of like marginalized groups. So the intersection of disability, race, and gender has always been actually there. So this is also like a perspective of Eurocentric ideas of innovation or tech developments, how we tend to do not see these interconnections. So many Black disabled scholars and activists have, like Nimara Erevalis or Sami Shalk and many others, have, as you can see on the slides, have written a lot of utopias, a lot of practices, but also a lot of theories about these interconnections, how techno-ableism always have been gendered and racialized. And I think one of the very interesting idea is in the construction of the disability justice movement within disabled scholars of color, trans, queer, poverty class folks, and many other marginalized groups coming from a diverse community together across visible and hidden disabilities, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation. They have built a collective in 2005 by Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, and Leroy, which is a very interesting movement actually to see beyond these differences and isolation and try to show actually from everyday life how what we understand as disability justice always been intersectional. So you might ask, why do I need to put intersectional disability justice? And not taking this movement of disability justice for granted, again, there is also a notion of like race has always been silent in this understanding. So when we think of like the so-called scientific knowledge, especially during the eugenic and the legitimation of research on syphilis in the USA or in apartheid times in South Africa, this has been actually always interconnected. So the so-called pure and useful, productive human has been also understood using these technologies actually to legitimize where, for instance, there is a capability of intelligence or not intelligent or human enough or whatsoever. So again, the biometrical data or medical history has always been also misused and misused by technological developments as well. So I think it's also interesting to see these interconnections, how we can also see tech developments from post-colonial or decolonial perspectives. So to go back to, this is not actually an accessible slide. On this slide, you can see there are 10 intersectional, 10 causes of intersectional disability justice. So the principle of disability justice has always been like intersectional. I cannot go through them due to the time, but I just wanted you to know that there is these principles from disability justice developed by Since Invalid. Ren already talked about the work. Since Invalid as a disability justice-based performance project that incubates and celebrates artists with disabilities, centering artists of color, LGBTIQ, gender variant artists as communities who have historically been marginalized. They have also shown how these movements has not been also taught from a cross-community or cross-movement intersectional way of vision, or if you want, cryptopias or innovations, so to say. So I brought more books, so this is going to be more a lecture because I have nothing to offer as a technological, practical insights. But these books are important because I have learned a lot also to see these interconnections, how, on the one hand, many Black, trans, feminist utopias and theories have been actually developed outside of academia in order to show how this capitalist idea of understanding technology as per se something which is valuable, but the question that they have been raising is also like on which cost. So if we see also like technological developments, for instance, when you see medical developments in the USA, like I said, in the syphilis studies as well, they have been definitely for a better future, for a better understanding of medical developments and treatments. But at the same time, the people like the Black male they have used for this research, they wouldn't even know that what was happening. So there was also no consensual understanding. So this is not, at the same time, this is not like history that we are just referring. I think due to the political situation, what we know now is also like to have a register of all chronically ill people or disabled people in Germany. Again, this is also a very scary political situation to see what has happened during colonial times and settler colonial times, and the interconnection of developing racial capitalism has always been techno-ableist structures. So for whom is it going to be interesting? But I don't want to talk a lot about it. I have already had half of my time. I want to talk about also about hacking and subversive strategies of feminist, Black understanding of also going through and tackling these colonial continuities. I think it's also very interesting to see how people have been negotiating or navigating through this system and develop their own understanding of what we call now assistive technology. So in the context of disability, we always have a term for technology to be used assistive because of your disability. It doesn't matter if you are using some computers as assistive technology or many other issues, but disabled scholars from disability justice movement, they also develop this understanding of like every technology that we use, like you showed, in everyday time is also assistive. So there is no such thing like only for disabled people, then we use accessible and assistive. So everything I do when I wake up in the morning, my cafe machine, or I use my computer to write email, this is all assistive technology. So I think it's also about how we understand these terminologies and what does actually mean for people living with these intersections of margins. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about. So intersectional disability justice means also that heterosexism, ableism, colonialism, sexism, racism are interconnected, inherently interconnected. So when we see how the capitalist society is developed, so there is always a very basic techno-ableist understanding. To just maybe give one example, one of my students came from lecture, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. She was in the toilet and she came back and then she talked to the class how ableist this sensor for the lighting is, because our university just shifted, I think, last year. So when you go to the toilet and then you just, this student uses a wheelchair. So when you see it, like, I don't know, for a while, so the lights turn off. But because she sits on the wheelchair, she's too small so that the technology, I mean, the sensors see also that she's moving. So everything was dark, and then it was not that funny, actually. And I mean, I have seen that, but again, because I didn't see it from a very techno-ableist perspective, so I was also thinking, and I remember one time I went to somewhere, I don't remember, on the airport, there was also a problem washing my hands after going to the toilet. And then so I tried to move to the next toilet and try to have this sensor to get the soap. I don't know the name for it. And then it was not working, so the guy next to me just had no problem, and then he was getting the soaps automatically. So this was also like, I don't know, maybe it was not my intention to hack the system, but all of a sudden I was like, there is some whiteness in it, and then I took like a piece of paper and tried to sew, because I was a bit crazy, and then I was like, this can't be the case, and then I put that paper, and then all of a sudden I get a soap. And I talked to another black person, a friend of mine from Sweden, actually, and he told me there is like a lot of discussion also going on how technologies has been created within a very racist system. So the white, cis heterosexual, not disabled or able-bodied person is or has always been also in that case. On the one hand, because they produce the technology most of the time for us. On the other hand, this idea of like not even coming to the idea that the lights are not going on when you are not on a certain level of, or when you are not walking. So I think it was also very interesting for me to see these interconnections. So I think that's my last slide. But again, like I said, there are a lot of people that I cannot, or a lot of ideas in these 10 minutes, I cannot talk about them. But again, I brought another bunch of books from Roha Benjamin, an amazing scholar and activist, and I think so useful in thinking beyond this idea of fantasy of like what we understand as progressive, innovative. And she also wrote, especially in the last book, in between, in the manifesto, that's very helpful in dreaming disability justice, and also like giving some very practical examples of like how Black feminists and disabled and trans and many other marginalized activists have always been developing these theories actually for tech developments from the street and in their activism. And I think the last point that I want to mention is also, like you said, Ren, the movement in the 80s when for the first time disabled people blogged the state, the streets in New York, among others, Judy Hoyman. She passed away last year, a Jewish disabled woman. For the first time, they blocked the streets so people have seen them as a disabled person because they were not disability visibility in the States. That's what we get afterwards in the 90s, the Disability Act, what has been also worldwide a very basic fundamentals of disability rights. So I think it's also, again, showing these interconnections and going on the street, at that time at least, and fighting for a better future. And I think what Ruha Benjamin and many other people who has better understanding of viral justice or technology after race, is called one of her book, is also offering these ideas which goes beyond critique and dreaming, again, intersectional disability justice. Thank you so much. That's it from my side.
Sweet. So we're going to ask each other a few questions, and then you can think about questions that you might have for us. And Robel, I was thinking just at the end of your talk that I maybe would share, I think is it the Capitol crawl that you're talking about at the end? Was that when Judith Heumann and everyone was organizing to climb up the steps of the Capitol, the U.S. State Building? It also was reminding me of this protest movement that was also here in Germany, in Frankfurt am Main, in 1974, when Gusti Steiner and Ernst Clay did this blockade. Maybe you also, you're shaking your head. Mm-hmm. This is like another thing, but for the audience, it reminded me also of this moment when people used mobility devices of all sorts to block streetcars that were moving through the city to kind of build awareness for the public that many disabled people could not use public transport at the time. And it was actually something that was a kind of collective resistance moment that raised a lot of awareness. And I think that these kind of direct lit nonviolent confrontations are really interesting to look at as like a kind of history of them in disability movements. And I wanted to tie that a little bit to your work with intersectional disability justice. So this is it's not really a collective, or would you say it's a collective, or is it an advocacy group, or I don't know, I'm curious how you would define it, but also just to ask you a little bit about your activist work as well with that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I'm not sure how, intersectional disability justice, we have founded it 2022 with my colleague Constanze Duta, an autistic activist, and has been doing a lot of anti-racist work in Berlin. And I think we have now 12 members, and who are positioned differently. So in terms of disability, hidden and visible disabilities, in terms of some of them have expertise in reproductive justice, who have started, like Ulrike Krause, started speaking about disability and sexuality when I was born, on that specific year. So there is this collective is also understanding. I would say a collective, but I think due to our positions, some of them are white, some of us are racialized, so we have also different intersections. But the vision, I think, we have for disability justice, that's the collective, I think, a collective vision of beyond our differences. There is this vision of we don't have to perform in a very heteronormative way. We don't have to act, or even within the disability justice, we have internalized ableism, and we have also this understanding of going with the capitalist system. So I think it's very interesting, because we are just 3 years now almost, and we are, I think, developing. But the basic commonalities was we have a lot of questions from universities and social organizations asking about disability. Is trendy now, sexy, and every university will ask some workshop, and what we call it in German Fortbildung, in disability. So they have it, and so that they have it on their checkbox, so checklist, and then it's just disability. We have spoken about it last year. So I think I am also a bit tired of that, to be honest, because at the same time there's also a lot of movement, and I think my energy as well to spend on the collective, like many disabled students and chronically ill students from not academic background and racialized and gendered people anyways, they have this idea of actually the disability justice. The university is not accessible. The only accessible university I know is on the homepage when they call it like inclusive university. So I think it's also, but when you speak like with a movement on the ground, so they always show you like, because I came from non-academic background, so the university is not accessible for me. And the other person would say maybe I have a child and there's not even a daycare for us. So this is also thinking through, so who has access? Again, I think you, Pernilla, you were also speaking about who has the time to do also certain things. I think it's also who has access to very basic everyday life, actually. So thank you for your question.
Ren, I also have a question for you. Yeah. It is regarding your brilliant installation, Mining Misspellings, and the way you express powerlessness in the face of big tech, but at the same breath also empowering ourselves as agents of technological invention. And I'm wondering, how is it for you? How do you look at? There seems to be something about gaining agency together that seems like for all of us. And how is that for you in this particular making this work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that story that I told a minute ago about this blockade that I mentioned in 1974 in Frankfurt am Main, this was this kind of this moment of collective refusal or collective awareness building that I think that came up for me as a kind of image or a story from disability history that we could bring back around. And I think that in the work, Mining Misspelling, I really thought about recentering my experience as a neurodivergent, dyslexic person, and thought about how to move from this space as a kind of agential world-building practice, actually, also aligns with so many other anti-colonial struggles and the ways in which we notice the glitches in the machine or the troubles in the infrastructures that can't hold us and position us to be corrected all the time. And so I think that through this, the moments when we feel and we notice our difference, because something is indicated maybe with a squiggly red line, maybe in other more intense ways as non-aligning, that it's a way to kind of work from my personal experience to move in a broader sense and to find other points of connection where our bodies and our experiences disrupt what's considered to be the norm, and how to uphold that as also a powerful agential place to move from rather than something that continues to harm us. So that was the kind of work, the shift that I was trying to make with the work. In the development of the work, it's also a video installation that you can move through. I taught my computer how to spell the way that I spell, so I refused learning spelling. And I, in fact, taught my computer back how to speak my way. And I think that kind of challenging of who's speaking to who was something that I played with a lot in this work. And I think these kind of dynamics of who has agency to speak to who is also something that the work connects to in a larger sense. Yeah. I have also a question for you, Pernilla. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, in your work with the open source tech that you're doing in diabetes, I was curious to speak about, or if you could speak about the community or what the sense of community is. You said that was a place where you gather a lot of support, but also where you maybe research with people or kind of troubleshoot together. It's a kind of hacking community that has to do with the very intimate body. I'm just curious to hear more about that experience for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is the technical aspects, of course. There would maybe traditional forums where you talk about technical things. There's also open mic sessions, and there's several kind of places to meet and to support each other. But also, I think it's also not only about fixing problems and the fact that we do meet is also speaking to the world that this is needed. So there is like the sort of like the things we do, but it's also demonstrative in a way of like showing what sort of technology actually, first of all, like what we're willing to do for this, but also that this is there are like these gaps, and together we find ways to fill it. And to me, it's really, it's really important to do this together, of course. But like I said also earlier on, that there's also a sort of labor involved in doing this. And even though it's like nice to be together and nice to do it, there is also it comes from a place of necessity. So I think it's also important to think about like the labor and so.
I just got the sign from the stage manager that we have 10 minutes left. So I'm curious if anyone in the audience has a question that they'd like to ask us, or otherwise we can keep chatting in our talk show mode. I think that there will be microphones around if you're, yeah.
It's hard to see. No, then maybe I can ask you a question.
I actually wanted to ask you a question, but
I will shoot.
Okay.
So I was reading a chapter in the text Intersectional Colonialities, sorry, and in particular the chapter Debunking the Myth of Hard-to-Reach Groups. Thinking about like the way that where I'm coming from, I started thinking about like how would you relate this to hacking? Because as like hackers often imagine or might self-identify already as the other or as the fixer or the disruptor, and I'm wondering. From that perspective, could you talk about this chapter?
That's actually a very interesting question, because many black feminists like Bell Hooks would say like already the always already. So this idea of like, I think, who has the power also to construct, and then we come up with an idea within the university. I think I would totally agree with you, because many marginalized groups, for the reasons I have been speaking, like colonial history, and the misusage of research that also automatically make also construction of certain groups like disabled people and racialized groups as hard to reach. Hard to reach, the question will be for whom? That's obviously for academia. And when you have an understanding of like very critical perspective on colonial history, like and within the decolonial theories, you always have a storytelling or other very innovative ways of knowledge production, because they don't want this knowledge to be extracted by academia. And so I think this is also like this hacker strategy of marginalized groups to say like, yeah, we will stay hard for you, but that's why you always have also like community members, like insider from the community, where they have a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge also about the disabled community in Berlin, for instance. So if you are just like nobody and very interested to do research on sexuality and disability, and then you just come from the university, so it's also like very hard for you or for us, not part of the community, to go there. But at the same time, and then what we produce when we come back to the university is like, you can barely do research on this very interesting topic. So they are very hard to reach, and then you have produced like a lot of knowledge on this non-existing knowledge, actually. So I think this hacker strategy from the other side is, of course, to say, like Romani people in Germany, there's no way you can just come from outside a community and try to do research exactly for that reason, that this knowledge has been used against this community. So I think that's a very interesting question, because to think also hacking strategy as a way of survival, as a way of, I think it's also like like the politics of refusal as well. It's just like we are not doing what. So I have to think about it a lot. I really like the question. Thank you.
I think that there's a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the three of you. I'm so glad you're all here, and I'm so glad you're all speaking at Transmediale, which is a festival that I have been going to for the last 12 years, living here in Berlin. And I can probably count on one hand the amount of times disabled people are featured in the program. So thank you, Transmediale, for doing that. I hope that continues, and I hope it continues in a much more, visible, stronger way. I was going to ask a question about other survival strategies, but you just answered my question that I was going to ask. So thanks, Robel. But maybe if you have other hacking strategies that you could talk about, and not just in terms of technology, but just the question that's always in my mind is, what do we do? How do we deal with the increase in fascism that we're experiencing in an extremely direct and violent way here in Germany? I think this is a question that we really need to start asking more and more and more in platforms like this, and from an experience-centered perspective, so from the perspective of those who are being oppressed and marginalised, and maybe to try and sort of, bring it back to a more positive note. What can we do? What are some kind of things that maybe haven't been said today that you can sort of think of as immediate? Well, we need this and we need that, and yeah, that's my call for help. Help!
Thank you for the question. I have something, if okay. Okay, so two small things came to mind. One is with a collaborator of mine, Schwarzrund. They recently did a conversation with Udo Sekerk, who's a part of the CRIP movement here in Germany. And in this conversation, or maybe beyond it, Schwarzrund said kind of off the cuff that Udo always asks for us to ask for the whole cake. So what does this mean? In disability organizing, queer organizing, trans organizing, I think that sometimes we can get focused on small incremental changes, but always, I think that what he's saying is to keep the whole cake in mind, not to accept a single slice, but to demand always that the whole cake must be available for us. And I sometimes, when thinking about mustering the energy to resist rising fascisms, I think about keeping the whole cake in mind, and somehow that, as an image, quite helps me. And second is the Eva Majeska, who I mentioned before, has this book, Feminist Anti-Fascism, and I've been reading it, and it really ties to me, for me, like across many different small points, like also Tina Kemp's work, for example, on thinking of refusal, but also like the kind of quiet, ongoing, everyday, like habitual, perhaps, ways in which we can make more space together and for each other. I think that rehearsing things as though they are possible is something that maybe we have to keep doing now more than ever, even when it's difficult. But I'm sure my other panelists...
I mean, I'm just thinking about like some things we spoke about earlier on, about thinking about like access needs, but also the normalizing of access needs. So like not separating so much between like disabled people's needs and but also kind of like look at ourselves and like always like kind of like keep up to date with what our needs are and keep communicating to each other about what we need on a regular basis, I think. This is also, I don't know, do you have something?
I think on the fascism part, I don't know how come I would be answering that, but I think something what you mentioned is also like this idea of like, or dreaming of disability justice collectively also mean like also seeing these mechanisms of isolation. I don't know why was not our topic, but when we had lunch, we were talking about isolation, spatial, like how this has been legitimate, like, I don't know, in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, I think, for elderly people, you should live outside of Amsterdam because you cannot that's the accessible house. So we find like, yeah, actually, yeah, it's fair. I mean, like, they don't need to be in the, in the city center. So at the same time, you have all this legitimation. Like for disabled people, yeah, I could understand if they don't have to be like in Berlin. This is only like geographical isolation. It happens also with other oppressive system, like who is really worried about the fascist, increasing fascist ideologies, which is not just like it could happen, but it is Trump is in power, and then what happened with all the NGOs and with all these hate ideologies and how these things are connected. I think, especially for disabled people in Europe and in the States, or trans people or marginalized, racialized people, I think this is not something new. The fear is not something new, but at the same time, my question is also like, what else should happen to realize that this is real? I think that's like a question which is also missing, like what else? Because we are just very close to that, whatever is going to happen. So I felt like, even with Cryptopia, I think I felt like there was the utopia in there. So I think we have to find a way of like understanding like this is real. This is not like ideologically, theoretically speaking. This is just outside of the door, and there's no coming back to that. So I think it's a good thing that you raised the question, so that we will just think and take it with us, and then think like, I don't know, do something, especially people on the position of power and privilege, and to say like, this is my time, because I might not be racialized, I might not be gendered in a way, or I might not be disabled, but this might be a real danger for those who are marginalized, especially for those. Thank you. I see the time is
Yes, I think the time is up.
Thank you so
you
much
all
for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you too. Yeah, thank you all so much. It was a
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.